Stop trying to skip over your grieving period and walk through it. So, today I'm going to talk about some more lessons from Joseph's life. It's a biblical story, and you have to learn how to feel things to forgive it. And so I want to start with sharing my first point, which is grief is a part of the healing process. So in the story with Joseph, you got his brothers who sell him into slavery. He goes through years and a couple of decades of, going from working in Potiphar's house to prison to being second in command over up under Pharaoh, right? Joseph ultimately saves everyone from starvation, but when he's reunited with his brothers, it's because the famine has happened and they're coming to Pharaoh like everyone else to try to get some food because they're running out of food. When he sees his brothers, he instantly recognizes them, but they don't know who he is. I said in my last video, I'm pretty sure that was hurtful, right? I know them, but they don't know me, which means Joseph had changed a lot. His brothers, though, even though I knew they had grown older, they still resembled themselves. Whereas Joseph, they didn't even recognize him. He resembled someone they didn't know. So that just goes to show the growth level differences, right, between the brothers and Joseph. What I'm saying is that that's a hurtful thing. And so Joseph accused them of being spies and had them thrown into prison for 3 days. And then he took them out. And I was like, whew, he wasn't over it at first if he had them thrown into prison for 3 days. He was hurt. He cried. He saw him, and all of the memories flooded back, all of the hurt, all of the pain. Even the dream he had had that had made them upset in the first place flooded back into his mind. And so he was wrestling with and grappling with his hurt, right? He didn't just see him like, oh, yeah, my brothers. That is not what happened, right? He really felt the things and the feelings, right? And so he ends up telling his brothers, bring back your younger brother, because he asked about their lives and they told him. So he tells them, bring your younger brother back, blah, blah, blah. And then the brothers go to the side. They start talking in their language because they don't know Joseph can understand them because Joseph has not revealed his identity. And they're saying, we are being punished right now for what we did to Joseph. And that was the point where Joseph started weeping. I think he realizes his brothers were sorry for what they had done. They knew they were wrong. And so the story continues where he lets one brother stay, he lets the rest of them leave. And when they return, they bring the youngest with them. So this was a back and forth, right? This wasn't a just you see your family like family, and now you're fine. That's not what happened, right? So they go, they return. The youngest is with them. He puts them through another test. Um, Ultimately, they all passed. The brothers passed the test, which was Joseph, I think, trying to assess if they were different, right? Eventually, he revealed his identity to his brothers, and when he did, again, he cried, he grieved, he talked to them, but he did tell them, "Don't be mad at yourselves for selling me into slavery," right? Because God sent me ahead of you all so that I could preserve many, many, many lives. Because had that not happened, Joseph wouldn't have become second in command under Pharaoh. And so, in his grappling, he came to the conclusion that it was meant for his good, although it hurt. And so he ends up telling his brothers, hey, you should go get dad so he can come. Pharaoh tells Joseph, hey, I'll put your family in the best land. So, go get your dad, do whatever you have to do. And so Joseph sent his brothers to go retrieve their own families and bring his father back. But he tells them, don't argue on the way. And so that means through observation, Joseph realized although his brothers were older, they still had some of the same tendencies. And one of those tendencies was to argue with each other, right? I thought that was just really, really funny. So they go get, the father. The father's like, take me at once to see my son. They reunite. And I thought another interesting thing was that his father lived an additional 17 years at that point. 17 was how old Joseph was when he was sold into slavery by his brothers. And so forgiveness on my next point, it requires honesty. Like I said, Joseph did not skip the process. He didn't pretend to be okay initially. He saw them and he cried, and then he tested them, and then he sent them away, and they came back and he tested them again. And so he really grappled with it. He didn't just skip to being okay. And I think often we're trying to skip to being okay because I don't think it's been very popular to say that you're not okay, to talk about the pain in a lot of, in a lot of instances, right? You have to keep going, you have to move forward, but it doesn't mean it didn't hurt. Next, I want to say restoration can follow grief. So he processed his grief and he chose restoration ultimately with his brothers, right? He he really had to just wrestle with it. But like I said, his father lived an additional 17 years after they reunited. And I feel like it symbolized how healing can redeem lost time, right? Exactly 17 years. And I thought, again, that was very, very interesting amount of time. And so I want to just encourage you to, embrace, your season of grief. Say it hurt, right? Things have happened to us. We've lost people and it hurt. We've lost opportunities and it hurt. I share a lot about how I was fired twice. That really hurt. I grieved, right? I grieved what I thought I should be doing in that season. I had to walk through embarrassment and shame, and it wasn't an easy season to grapple with. Although during that season, I've also shared I reconnected with my birth family. The season was for a purpose, but it doesn't mean it was an easy season for me. And I got judged extremely harshly, right? And I judged myself extremely harshly, if I'm being honest about it. It was a tough season. I had to walk through it, but it was still hard. And so, since it was hard, I had to learn how to shed some of that hardness. I had to grieve. I had to be honest. I had to say it sucked. I had to say it hurt, right? I journaled. I cried. I did a lot, right? I really had to walk through that though. I just could not skip to being okay right now and sharing all of this with you all. That I not walk through that, I couldn't even share about it. I couldn't encourage anyone else that the season will shift. I couldn't tell you that although, you may feel like a failure in one season, it doesn't mean you're going to always be like that, or doesn't mean you're going to stay feeling like a failure. I couldn't encourage anyone else if I hadn't walked through those seasons myself. Again, in walking through it, a part of that was healing. And a part of that healing was honesty. And so I want to share a few journal prompts. Question number one, I'm going to read the question. In what ways have I felt disconnected from family or people I loved? And how did I cope with that and heal? Now, I share a lot about being disconnected from my birth family, but you could just move for a job and be disconnected from your family. It could hurt. You could feel left out. You may like move states, or you may change countries. I want you to write about that time. You could still live right in the house with them, but feel disconnected, right? Because maybe you make a decision everyone doesn't agree with. So I just want you to take out your journal and write about that time. And then also, how did you cope with it and heal? The next prompt: what does healing through grief look like for me right now? In that question, I want you to ask yourself, are there any areas you need to, truly grieve? Often we just keep going. Life hits, it hits, it hits. Something my mom, who raised me, used to say is that you got to roll with the punches. And so things keep hitting, but you keep going. But have you taken a moment to sit down right now to see what healing through grief right now, present day, would look like for you? That could look like you taking a moment just to cry about something that happened. It could just look like you taking a moment to journal it out and say, this happened and I never really dealt with it, right? The next thing was in my story, I shared about how Joseph wept. I think it was about 3 times where he cried, where he grieved, right? Very loudly too. But what does that teach me about my own healing process? So, hearing how Joseph had to grapple with how he was crying, how he was hurt, how seeing his brothers reopen that wound, how does that impact your own healing process? What does that bring up for you? And so I'm wrapping up talking about Joseph. I shared in my last video, I really love this story because 400 years later, Joseph's great, 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 whatever granddaughters are the ones, 5 daughters, who speak up about their inheritance, right? They speak up about their inheritance. So whereas Joseph was severed from the family and he ended up building, these granddaughters of his down the line, they speak up about what they feel like is rightfully theirs. And I just love how, you can do something and you don't know how it's going to impact the next generation, but you look up and it's like Wow, 400 years later. Of course, Joseph doesn't know this. Of course, he didn't know this was going to happen. But his granddaughters, end up being very outspoken, and they had, because they spoke up for what was theirs, it changed the laws of that time. It also has impacted the laws of our time. And so, very interesting group of girls, all Joseph's descendants. And so, I love that full circle moment. But anyway, I'm gonna make sure I drop those journal prompts in under the description, and just take your time and do those. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.